Corey, Alina, I see Amber Anderson and Roger Roper. They're all part of the SHPO team that works with us down at the Rio Grande Depot in the best of times. You've probably seen a few emails I've sent out over the last year, just kind of updating folks that Alina has sent out to the CLG list. But I just wanted to say hello to everybody. Give you a quick update on the Rio Grande Depot is we don't have one right now. It was heavily damaged in the earthquake almost a year ago. The state is still doing assessments, and I think we're just starting to move into the contract phase to get that repaired. But it's every intention of the state to get that up and going and get us back into those offices, even though it might take us a while. Another good update is that as vaccines roll out and numbers decline, I know a lot of our team is excited to go out into the various corners of the state. I know Steve Cornell, our architect, has been out visiting a lot of folks. We have Roger Roper, who's actually in Sanpete County. I know probably many of you know him. So we hope to get out and do a lot more site visits over the next year now that things are hopefully improving. We have a lot of great information, and we're really excited to have you all here today. And I'm not going to belabor it because I want Alina to be the star of the show. So I'll pitch it back to you, Alina.
All right, great. So we will just get started. Let me share my screen here. We'll just do the whole screen, okay. All right, so as many of you know me, I'm Alina Franco. I manage the Certified Local Government Program for the Utah SHPO. And again, this will be recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel later for those who need it. And as we get going, if you have questions along the way, just put them in the chat box and I'll pause like halfway through, and then there'll be time at the end for any questions that you may have. So just a quick look at the agenda. We're going to talk about the program, what it is, how you become certified, CLG status. We'll go through some websites, and then we'll dive right into the grant information and eligible grant projects, and we'll talk about the grant forms, and and then again we'll pause at the end for questions. So first of all, what is a certified local government? A certified local government is any local government, whether that's a city or a county, that has been certified by the National Park Service as eligible to apply for grants for historic preservation. Right now, we have 99 local governments throughout the state that participate in this program, and we usually add 1 or 2 every year. In fact, we just added Santaquin as our new 99th CLG, and we welcome them to the program. So I'm going to call it CLG from now on, but for certified local government. But the CLG program is intended to provide assistance to local governments as they complete their work in preservation. And the primary way we do that is through the grant program. So you can apply for regular grants from us. Also, when you're a CLG, your commission members and members of the public, they can get access to training and technical assistance, to assist you in your preservation efforts. You get to participate in the nomination of local properties to the National Register of Historic Places. And this means when Corey Jensen, our National Register Coordinator, when he's reviewing nominations, he will send you a copy for you to make comments, if you choose to do so. And then there can be economic benefits as well when preservation is supported at that local level. So, how does your local government become a CLG? It's pretty easy. All you have to do is pass a preservation ordinance, which sets up a historic preservation commission. Now, this commission is an advisory board for the mayor, city council, or your county commissioners. And your commission can play an important part in your community because you can be the first contact, for that local property owner when they have questions about, how to take care of their buildings and what kind of incentives are available for that. And we have an ordinance that you can use. You can adjust it how you want, but we have a base one that you can use. So once you pass the ordinance and the commission is set up, your local government will just submit certification paperwork to me. I will review that at the state level, and then I send it on to the National Park Service for the final approval. And once they send the official certification letter, then you are an activist CLG and you can apply in our next round of grants. So as a CLG, your status will be either active or inactive. And this comes from when we do our program reviews. So every 4 years, we are required to review your program just to make sure that you still have everything in place to be a CLG, meaning, is your ordinance, still in place? Do you have at least 5 persons serving on the board? Because over the course of 4 years, a lot of things change, people leave, new people come in, and we need to make sure that we have the best contact information. So you're getting, grant announcements, nominations, et cetera from us. And also the Park Service, they often send out webinars and cool little things that they have. So you want to make sure you're getting those. So when these program reviews, they haven't been completed by your CLG, then your status becomes inactive and you cannot apply for grants. But it's pretty easy to reactivate. All you have to do is, again, send me a copy of your ordinance, send me the resumes of at least 5 people who are on the board, and then you can be active and stuff. So, if you're not sure what your status is, just let me know. It's easy for me to look that up, and then we can talk about that, if that's a problem. All right. So here are some websites that have some pretty good resources for you. There's our website for the SHPO, which I will take you to in a minute. There's Preservation Utah's. They are a statewide preservation organization and a great partner of ours. They have things like education programs and materials. They also run a pretty popular historic home tour every year, and they have a bunch of resources for property owners who want to rehab their home. That third link will take you straight to the historic preservation section on the National Park Service website. They also provide a lot of free resources for CLGs. If you're interested, you can read about the federal laws for historic preservation, but there's also technical assistance and all that other stuff that we talk about. And then that last website for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, or the NAPC, they are a nationwide organization that's specifically for local preservation commissions. So they usually have a forum every other year for commissions to get together, and they talk about, how to work with your local government and how to work with members of the public. And I'll also take you to that website as well. Okay, so we're going to leave the PowerPoint, head over to some websites. All right, so here is the NAPC's website. Again, they have some pretty good things for you to look at. I recommend going over to their resources tab right here because they have design guidelines and preservation plans from cities all across the United States. So, if you're interested, if you want to see what other cities have done, or, just what these two would look like, come here and check that out. I recommend it. And then I'll give you a quick look at our website. Oh, wait. Accidentally hit the wrong thing. So here is our website. Now, this is the historic buildings section. And if you scroll down, you can see we have tabs for National Register. So if you want to learn more about that and about how to research your property, you can check that out. If you're interested in historic tax credits, which Amber runs in our office, you can click there. CLG information that can be found under local governments. And then we also have a building resources tab, again, with PDFs that can help guide you, as you're rehabbing your property and stuff. And then if you want contact information for anyone in our office, you can just scroll down and hit preservation staff. And that will give you, there's all of us, and we have phone numbers and email addresses. for you. So again, a brief look, but I just, if you, in your spare time, if you want to learn more, come back to these websites. All right, now what you've all been waiting for, we're going to dive into the CLG grants and stuff. So a question I get asked a lot is this tax money? The answer to that is no. The money we get that is passed on to you guys, to the CLGs, it comes from the Historic Preservation Fund, which is all offshore oil lease money. So it's not tax money. This is a yearly appropriation that's passed by Congress, and it's a grant program that's specifically set up for SHPOs. And by law, we are required to pass on 10% of that money to CLGs. Although traditionally in this state, we give out around 20%, so around that, double that. All right, now we're finally on to grants and stuff. So CLGs must have active status before you can apply. So again, if you're inactive, talk to me, we can work things out. And CLGs can only have one grant at a time. These are non-competitive grants. So if your project is eligible, you're most likely going to get the grant. In some cases, we may adjust the grant project or the grant award, but I'll let you know, the reasons why, that happens. But that's pretty rare. These are reimbursement matching grants, and the maximum you can request is $10,000. Obviously, you don't have to request the maximum every time, but make sure you ask for, what you need, and feel free to give yourself a little wiggle room, in case unexpected expenses pop up. Grant applications were sent out in January, which you all have hopefully received through email. They're due back to me by the second Friday in February, which will be next Friday, so February 12th. If you see problems meeting this deadline, I can push that back, so just let me know, if you have problems. And then we will announce grant awards in mid to late March. And then the grant cycle will start on April 1st of this year, and it will run to the end of August in 2022. So, if you're thinking about applying for grant funds this year, and if you have questions about, defining your projects, please contact me. It's part of my job to help you through that process, all right? So let me try to explain how the grant works. So this is a reimbursement matching grant, which essentially means you have to pay for the project up front, complete it, and then after it's been approved by our office, you will be reimbursed 50%. All right. So I'll try to explain that a little bit more. So the grant amount you ask for, you have to have an equal local match. So your local match, that could be cash, it can be in kind, or it can be a mixture of the two. We leave that up to you. And then you add those two together and it gives you the total project budget. And again, you don't get the monies up front, you get them after the project you've already paid and completed your project, and then you submit for reimbursement. So when you submit for reimbursement, you send all your paperwork to me where you show what your total project budget was, how much it cost. And it's very important to remember that at least 50% of your total project has to be cash expenditures. The other 50, again, is the local match. It can be, cash or in kind. So let's say for this example on the screen, they asked for a $10,000 grant and they had an equal local match for a total project budget of $20,000. So, once the project is completed, they're all done. And they send in the paperwork to me, they have to show at least 50% or 10,000 of that was cash. So please remember that formula or how it works, as you're applying for grants and as you're working through your projects, that you have to meet that 50% cash requirement in order to get your full grant amount back. So hopefully I've explained that in a clear way. If not, let me know. I'm happy to talk about this as you're budgeting for your projects. All right, so let's go over what kind of projects that can be funded. And all of this might be review for those folks, have been doing this for a while, but I know we have a lot of new faces, so we're going to go over all of this. Corey Jensen is going to talk about the first two projects, survey and National Register nomination. All right, so Corey.
Go ahead. All right. Nice to see you all, even though I can't see you all. So when a new community becomes a CLG, or an older CLG has not done an inventory of their historic properties in like a decade or so, we always recommend starting with what's called a reconnaissance level survey. Survey is the most basic way of getting an inventory, as I said, for the historic properties in your city, whether you survey the whole city or just different neighborhoods at a time. It's really a good baseline because doing a survey will then provide you information on what historic resources you have in the community. There are two types of survey, as you see here on the slide, a reconnaissance level survey and the intensive level survey. So the reconnaissance level survey is, as I mentioned, basically an architectural inventory of a given area of your community. What it entails is you would use your grant to hire a research consultant, and they would go out in your community and go street by street in the given survey area. They would photograph each building, and then they have a form that they provide information on that goes into our database. And this includes the type and style of architecture, basic construction materials, and the building's age, and then most importantly, evaluation of its historical integrity, whether it would be considered contributing for the National Register or non-contributing. And that's determined by alterations on the property, whether they're a lot of alterations, major ones, or just minor ones. When the survey is done, the consultant will then provide a report to the community, and this includes basically a historical chronology development of the city, of the architecture in the city, and how the architecture fits into that development. So you have kind of a nice little background history of the city, as well as the history of the architecture. And then there's also recommendations that the consultant will put in that report for further historic preservation endeavors in your community, which would include research on particular other properties, deeper research on those, perhaps buildings that would be good to nominate to the National Register of Historic Places, or potential historic districts, ideas for preservation planning in the community, things like walking tours and so forth. That's all included in the reconnaissance level survey, or RLS report. And then that can be a useful planning tool. And then you also have photographs of all the buildings, and then the data that goes into our database. We use that data to provide information to future inquiries, whether that's for individual properties or larger neighborhoods. The second type of survey on there is the intensive level survey. And that is more, as it says, taking an intensive kind of a deep dive into the history of particular properties. So this is more research on individual buildings. And it involves everything from doing a title search for that property to background histories on the owners, a general historical association with the property. It includes a set of photographs, and in many cases, a floor plan drawing and a site plan along with aerial photos. So it's basically a whole research package on that property. This is sometimes done prior to nominating a building to the National Register. If we're not sure that it has the requisite significance, we will recommend that an intensive level survey be done. A lot of communities will after they've done the reconnaissance level survey with one grant, they will, with the next grant, have a certain number of properties done at the intensive level. So they have that basic background information. And it also helps if you are looking at a future historic district. This can provide some context information on individual properties to give a little more detail rather than just looking at the overall development of a neighborhood. The pricing on these varies. I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I think for a reconnaissance level survey, a consultant will charge anywhere from $18 to $25 per building. And that depends on if you're doing what's called a standard survey. A standard survey would record every building in a given survey boundary area. Or if you're just doing a selective survey, meaning you're hitting properties throughout the area, only those that meet the criteria you're looking for. Those usually cost more than just doing every property. So that kind of helps you get an idea. If you're looking at an area of, say, 400 buildings at $20 a building, that's going to be about $8,000 a consultant will charge to survey that area. Intensive level surveys range from around $900 to $1,200, depending on how old the property is or how far the consultant has to travel. So that's kind of the survey, but we always recommend that CLGs, if you don't have a reconnaissance level survey done for your community, to do one. And if you're a new CLG, to do that first before you start anything else, because as I said, it gives you a good baseline of what historic properties you have. And just for the record, most people think 100 years old or older than that is a historic, would be considered a historic building. But actually the National Register of Historic Places uses a 50-year cutoff. So now we're looking at buildings 1971 and older as being historic. So if that gives you an idea of how historic your community is. Some people don't like the idea of anything from the 50s to the late 60s or early 70s being historic, but that's how we review things through the National Register. Alina, I don't know if we're taking any questions during this or just holding them to the end, but if there are no questions on survey, let's move to the National Register. So the National Register of Historic Places is the federal list of properties that are found to be significant in our country's and our local history past. And our office manages the National Register for the state of Utah. I've been the National Register coordinator for over 20 years now and seen a lot of different kinds of properties being nominated. As you can see on here, there are three kind of categories that we look at for nominating properties. The first one that most people think of is the individual nomination, and that is a single property being nominated to the National Register. And the next one would be a historic district. That could be anywhere from a few properties up to a few thousand properties, in some cases in the state. And then the multiple property submission. And this is more of a context under which you would nominate individual properties or historic districts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Basically, a property has to meet three criteria to be considered eligible for nominating to the National Register. The first one is it has to be at least 50 years old, except in exceptional cases of either architecture or historical significance. I don't know if we have any that meet that criteria that have been nominated actually in the state right now. The next one is it has to retain good historical integrity. So that means that it doesn't have to be perfect condition, but its condition should be what we use a rule of thumb, recognizable by the original owner. So if it has a few alterations on it that aren't too egregious, or maybe a small addition or something, especially if it's not on the primary facade of the building, then we would consider that still eligible for nominating. If it has a pretty large addition that kind of overpowers the historic part of the building, or major alterations on it, and both of these would have to occur less than 50 years ago in most cases, then we would say that the building does not retain historic integrity and wouldn't be eligible for listing. And then finally, and most importantly, the building has to have significance. And that's kind of the crux for a lot of people. We can have a building that is in great historic condition, has great integrity, and is at least 50 years old, but it might be a really common property or house type or something that is not really significant on its own and may not have anybody who lived there who was significant in the past. And so it would be difficult to nominate that building just because there's no real significance to it. In this case, we would look at doing a historic district if there are a number of these properties in a neighborhood that on their own are not that significant, but as a combination make up a neighborhood that might be more significant because of its architectural development. That's when we would look at historic district nomination. But if the property does have architectural significance, or if somebody important lived there, or if there was an association with a broader, what we call broad pattern of history, then we would look at nominating that property individually. The next thing on here is the historic district. As I mentioned, that's when you have a neighborhood or even a full community, if you're a smaller community, of good examples of the historic properties in the city that may not be significant on their own, but together they add to that whole architectural development of the city or the neighborhood. And that is when we would look at nominating a historic district. Salt Lake City, as you know, has a number of these different neighborhoods, like Yale Crest on the East Bench, the Capitol Hill Historic District, South Temple, of course, the Avenues, the Northwest Historic District. All these kind of had their own historical development and were nominated as individual historic districts. We also have a number of communities who have nominated basically their whole town, or at least their whole historic plat of the town as a historic district. Places like Payson, Escalante, Panguitch, let's see, Bountiful. There's a number of them throughout the state. So I think we have roughly 60 historic districts accounting for tens of thousands of properties listed on the National Register. And we have about 12 to 1,300 individual buildings listed on the National Register right now in Utah. The final thing here is the multiple property submission. And this is more of a way to assist in nominating individual properties or historic districts. And what this is a kind of a blanket document that provides a historical context that the property can be associated to, and also registration requirements. So if you have a theme of properties in a community or statewide, then you could create a multiple property documentation form. And it would go back and provide a history of that, whether it's an architectural type, like Roger prepared one for urban apartments in Salt Lake City back in the 1980s. He did a lot of background research and found that there was a certain era of these large apartment buildings in Salt Lake that catered to a certain type of person or family, and they were constructed in certain ways and had certain type of architecture. And so he wrote a history of those, and then we were able to nominate a number of those buildings individually using this document that lended some extra enhanced significance to them. So those are the types of, or the areas we look at under National Register nomination. And I think that's all I have to talk about that, Alina.
All right, thanks, Corey. All right, so moving on, another project can be pre-development. Now these are feasibility studies, working drawings that prepare historic properties for rehabilitation or stabilization. This project is available for any historic building. It doesn't have to be on the National Register, but it has to be historic. To give you an example, Murray CLG did a study on the Cahoon Mansion where they assessed the masonry and they had recommendations for future rehab. And then Hiram CLG just completed a project where they are looking to add a compatible addition to Elite Hall that's on the National Register. So, as you're doing these projects, Steve Cornell, our architect, he will work with you to help you create a scope of work to make sure the project, is meeting your goals and is adhering to our standards that we have to meet. So after that, you can do development projects, which are our most popular projects that CLGs do. This is rehabilitation work on National Register listed buildings. So the building, it has to be listed before you can apply for CLG funds. Now, these projects, they do require a preservation agreement from the property owner, which goes for a period of 5 years. And again, Steve will help you develop an appropriate scope of work for your project. Now, a question I get asked all the time is, we just want to paint. So can we just paint our building as a project? Now, painting just on its own is not a project we can fund. We are not allowed to fund routine maintenance, which painting falls under. But if painting is a part of a larger project, so you're also working on other things on the building, then yes, you can do painting. So painting just by itself, no. Painting, paired with other, work projects, then that's fine. And also with these projects, we can't do any kind of landscaping. The grant funds have to be solely used on the building. And I just saw a question from Michaela. What is the cost of this study? I assume you're asking about the Hiram one or the Cahoon Mansion. I think either of those. I'll get back to you about that later, but I know it was over $15,000 for both of them. Okay. Next project, you can also do preservation planning. This is when you use grant funds, you can develop a local historic preservation plan for your community. These kind of plans, they could be helpful because they can help you identify and focus your work as a preservation commission. A preservation plan can also be helpful when you're applying for grants because you can just point to your plan and say, okay, we've already thought this through and this is our next step in the plan. It's also useful for any new commission members that come in so they can understand where you are and it can help your local government, with their planning efforts. You can also do design guidelines, context reports, commission meetings. Any of those will help with your planning. It can be a very useful tool for your community. You can also do education and outreach projects, which are also very popular. We can fund training and workshops. This could be training for your city staff, for your commission members, or members of the public. For example, let's say your community has a number of people who want to restore their wood windows, but they don't know how. You can use grant funds to bring in a person to do a workshop for that public, to teach them how to do that work. You can also do any kind of lectures or workshops for our annual Archaeology and Historic Preservation Month in May. We can also fund things like historic walking tours, historic driving tours. Those are usually pretty popular. Now, the things we cannot fund. We cannot fund anything related to fundraising. We can't do signs. We can't do any kind of plaques. Also, if you want to do any projects that are museum related or archiving, unfortunately we can't help with that. But our sister agency, Arts and Museums, they have opportunities and they would be happy to help you. So we can get you in contact with them. And lastly, there's program admin. Now, this isn't really a project, but we do allow 15% for admin costs, which means if you have someone working on the grant who is getting paid, which is typically a city or county staff person. So they're like getting bids, they're managing your contractor, they're having meetings to make sure the work gets done. Then you can count their hours as part of your local match. Again, it's limited, to 15%. So, let's say you have a total project budget of 20,000, then you can count 15% or 3,000 of that, for admin costs. All right, so those were all the projects. Now these are all of the grant forms that you will be dealing with, as you apply for CLG funds. We're gonna leave the PowerPoint and we're gonna go over examples of all these forms. Again, it's review for those who already know the program, but for those who are new, I want you to at least know what you're looking at when you start getting all these forms from me. All right. All right, well, let's just start with the CLG grant application. Now this is a 5-page document, but 2 pages are for the appendix. It used to be 8 pages long, but we've simplified it to make it easier for you and for me. So again, this should look very familiar to you. So let's, just start. So at the top, there's grant information. So, what's the maximum you can apply for, how to turn it in. It has time frames for the grant. So the first section is section A. This is the contact information. So you identify your CLG, name, address, email, and the DUNS number, DUNS. The DUNS number is just an identification number for your local government, and it's required for all federal grants. So if you need that number, get in contact with your city or county clerk or treasurer. They should have that number. If not, you can follow the instructions for finding that number that I have sent out with the application. So, and hopefully the contact person, hopefully they'll be in contact with me for the entire 16 months. If something happens, let me know. If you want more than one person to be the contact, just put their information in there. It should fit, and if not, just include that in the email when you send that to me, and that will be fine. All right, so the next section is section B. This is your grant request and the budget summary. So, you put in your grant request. In this case, it's 10,000, and remember, you need an equal local match, which is 10,000, and you add those two together to give you the total project budget. And then we asked you to identify the match source and the match type. The match source is just where are these funds coming from, whether that's private or city funds, etc. And then the match type, that's going to be cash or in kind or a mix. And it's okay if you don't have everything figured out right now, that's fine. If you just want to guess to put things in there, that's fine. And then it will need to be signed by the CLG chair or the chief elected official. So, CLG chair, mayor, city manager, county commissioner, any of those will be fine. So that's the first page. All right, next section is the scope of work. So this is where you will mark all the projects. And then it also says, see Appendix A for details on project types. So if you have forgotten or you're just mixed up about, what these things even are, what's eligible, if you scroll down to the appendix at the bottom, it will go over all of that. So all the project descriptions we just talked about, it's all down there and stuff. So, you check which projects you want to do. For new CLGs or, for CLGs who haven't done this for a while, I recommend starting out with one, but that's up to you. We have CLGs who do one project. We have some who do 3 or more projects. So it just depends on your bandwidth and what you think you can manage. Yeah, and then, did you consult with the SHPO during preparation of this application? You are not required to, but I recommend it, because I can just tell you immediately if that project's going to work or not. So you don't need to wait and guess and hope that it will be accepted. You can just talk to me and I'll let you know. All right, so the next section, this is project descriptions, where you will summarize what your project is, and you'll fill out, so however many boxes you checked above, you will fill out here. So we checked, or in this example, they checked 2 boxes up here, so they are going to fill out 2 boxes down here. So here you can see, they're doing rehab on a house and a historic walking tour. So you'll just put descriptions in here. Now you can keep it like this, just a couple sentences so I know what you're doing. If you have more information, then you can add it because it helps me understand your project better. But I do not need a lot. You can tell I don't need that much. And then for project costs, you put them here. And these can be estimates. Again, we know you're not going to have everything figured out right now. So if you guess it's going to cost this amount, that's fine. And then we have start and completion dates. If you know exactly when you're going to start and you're going to be finished, put that in there. If you don't know, just it's going to be done sometime during the grant cycle, then I would just put the grant cycle dates in there. So April 1st of this year through August of next year. All right. So that's the second page. Now we're moving on to the third page of like an application. So this is the project budget, where you will just itemize all your costs that apply to your project. We have a pretty detailed budget outlined here, but you do not feel like you need to fill in every single cell. This is just to help you with your planning. You can keep it pretty general, as you've seen here. Look, they're just doing rehab work on a house, and they're doing the historic tour mobile app, with the costs and the total down here. But just remember that this cost, it should equal the total project budget in section B on page 1. So whichever numbers you have on the first page for the total, it needs to equal this total here and stuff. And that's it. That's it for the application. Again, the last 2 pages of this document is the appendix and stuff. So all those project types, if you can't remember, if you aren't sure what's eligible, just come down here and this will tell you all about it. It'll tell you what's eligible and what's not. And then when Corey mentioned those rates for survey and National Register, that's also on here. So you just got to scroll to where it says survey, and then we have, rates for buildings, rates for surveys right there. Yeah, so that is the application. Pretty easy. And now we're going to head over to what a typical state contract will look like. All right, so here's what a typical contract looks like. This is the cover sheet, and then there are 3 attachments. So here, here is your city information. Here's the contact person for the grant. Here are the dates for the grant cycle. And then your grant award will be under contract costs right there. And then, this will need to be signed by the chief elected official, and then we'll sign it and give a copy back. So again, this will be mayor, city manager, county commissioner. So now we're going to go over the attachments really fast. Again, there's 3 attachments. This is attachment A. It's just standard terms and conditions between government entities, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to go over it, but you look over it because it is a part of your contract. So that is attachment A. I'm going to scroll down to attachment B. All right, this is attachment B. This is what I want you to pay the most attention to. This is the scope of work for your project. So this tells you what work you're going to be doing and the requirements you have to meet for grant reimbursement. So this is, the same example we've been working with, so they're doing rehab on the house. They're doing the, the walking tour. As you can tell, the budgets are the same. They were just taken from the application and stuff. So you scroll down here, these are your project standards and the project description for, so here, they're updating the HVAC system and they're working on the windows. And then project standards, you're going to have project standards for each project, and you got to make sure that you read and understand this. So, it says the grant recipient, which is, your CLG, you must consult with our architect to develop a scope of work. You can use the scope of work when you're asking for bids or using it for RFPs. All expenditures must follow OMB regulations, and these are located on the CLG checklist, which we'll go over. And then, you must get bids, and then, the work must meet the standards. So each of your projects will have something similar to this, and they're all right here. So, let's say a couple months go by, let's say 6 months from now, you're like, I can't remember what we're supposed to be doing. Come check this, your attachment B, and talk to me, or both, whichever is easiest for you. So attachment B, and then attachment C is just special provisions for the grant. So, it says here, contractor, which is just the CLG, agrees to, pay for 100% of the total project budget, and 50% of that must be in cash, and then you'll be reimbursed up to the grant amount. And then these two things at the bottom, they only apply for those doing development projects, so rehab. So, a preservation agreement is required from the property owner that goes for a period of 5 years, and then a project sign. So this is a sign that I will email you, and you can just print it out, and it says it was funded, by us and by the National Park Service. So, just put that on the front door, or, in a window, or just somewhere that it can be readily seen. So yeah, that's a state contract. That's, yours will differ according to your projects, but that's, typically what it looks like. All right, so let's, I'll show you what the preservation agreement looks like. It's, so here it is, so it will be signed by the property owner and then by us, and then we'll give you a copy back. And they are just required for all rehab projects. Where am I going? All right, so now let's go look at the CLG checklist. So I give this to you, and this tells you what to do, what you need to do throughout your project in order to get reimbursement money and stuff. So remember, in the state contract, it said you have to follow OMB regulations. I've simplified it all for you on this one pager, and I will send this. You will get annoyed with how often I will send this to you. I will just send it out like it's candy. So let's just go through it. Okay, so before starting your project, review your scope of work in your grant contract. If you need help with RFPs, let me know. We have some examples that you can look at as you're, sending out to bid. For development projects, set up a site visit with our architect, and we want you to take before photos of the work areas. And then, all right, so let's say you've done that, and you're starting your project, you're actually during it. So during the project, if you purchase a service or an item over $1,000, then you have to get bids. You're not required to go with the lowest bid, but you are required to get them. Now, the only time you do not have to get bids is if you only have one vendor for the service or item in your area, or if you followed your local government's purchasing procedures. So either, at the end of the project, either you're going to be sending me bids, or, these other two, your situation is one of these other two that are outlined here. Also, keep all your invoices and receipts for any, grant purchase during the project. Those little receipts that you can get that are just like those small debit credit card receipts, those aren't good enough. I need an actual invoice or receipt that says, what you paid for, the date, how much it cost, that. And then all of those invoices and receipts, they have to be supported by a proof of payment. So proof of payment, it can be a canceled check, a copy of official payment ledger. It can be a bank sheet, just anything that proves that you actually paid and stuff. And then this is for education and outreach projects only. So they just have to include 2 paragraphs of language from the Park Service in their, either in the pamphlet, or it's got to be on the mobile app. but those are in your contract, or just talk to me. Either one works. And then, you know, as you're keeping track of your in-kind, or, you know, people working on it, there are specific rates that you have to follow and stuff, which are all detailed right here. So for consultants, you know, paid employees, you know, volunteer rate we have right here, and travel mileage. Now, the volunteer rate and the travel mileage, they may change year to year, but only by a couple cents. So when those rates update this year, I'll update the form and I'll let you know, and stuff. And then for, you know, at the end, if you're doing rehab, you know, take after photos. So you have before and after photos of your work. So let's say, you know, you've done all that, it's completed, you've submitted, and you're ready to submit for reimbursement, you know, you want your money. Then here, you know, after the work is complete and ready for reimbursement, you know, it gives you the date that all the work has to be completed by. And then you talk to me and I'll give you the reimbursement form. And then your reimbursement package, it must include, you know, the form, your bids, or, you know, your situation fell under one of those other two, you know, photos, invoices, proof of payment, and final deliverables. All right, so please keep in mind that you need to have the right documentation for your projects, you know, throughout the grant and stuff. So let me show you what the final form is. So the reimbursement form. All right. All right, so this is when your project is complete, and this is also the final report for your project. So it's pretty easy to fill this out. So you will identify your CLG, and then you can indicate whether your project was fully completed, or partially completed. And then additional space is provided on page 2 to describe, you know, either, you know, your project is completed, or, you know, why it wasn't completed, whether that is, you know, budget cuts or priorities change. You know, it can be a very brief description. So, and this is where you will itemize all your costs. And you can see I kept it pretty general and simple here. But if it's easier for you to break it down, you know, by contractor or by project, you know, that's fine. And if you find like you don't have enough room here, then you can use multiple pages of this sheet, you know, as long as the numbers, you know, add up at the end, that's fine. So here are the two projects, you know, we've been talking about this whole time. So rehab on the house and the walking tour. Here are the costs. And then you have to identify whether that was cash or in kind, because that will be taken into account when I'm processing your reimbursement and stuff. And then right here at the bottom, it says, you know, attach your invoices and your proof of payment, you know, or, you know, if you have in kind, you know, attach that as well. And then, you know, here it says attach bids, or, you know, you followed your local government's purchasing policies and stuff. So again, you're either going to send me bids, or or your situation, or you followed those other two things. You know, either you only had one vendor for the service or item in your area, or you followed your local government's purchasing policies. You know, and then it will be signed. And then the second page of this, you know, if you want to, you know, talk more about your projects, whether they were completed or partially completed, you know, you can just fill that out. Or, you know, if you just completed them, you can just say completed as planned. You know, so a pretty simple reporting form. Yeah, so those are all the grant forms that you will be getting from me. So let's hop back over to the PowerPoint. Okay, does anyone have any questions? I'm gonna go check the chat right now, and you can unmute yourself if you want, and stuff, and then we can answer, you know, any questions that you have.
So Alina, this is Chris.
Yeah.
So because of the webinar format, folks are not able to actually unmute themselves. So if they would like to speak, go ahead and throw your name in the chat and I can allow you to speak. That feels very powerful of me. But if you wish to speak, do it that way. If not, please use the Q&A or the chat box.
All right, well, I do see this one question from Katie Brown in the Q&A. Is that per contractor or labor charges per hour for the whole crew? For the CLG checklist, that is a maximum hourly rate and stuff. So if the contractor charges you for like the sum of the whole project, you know, that's fine if it's over that rate, but that's the maximum hourly rate that's allowed for contractors.
So a question from Nick in the chat window about sending out the link of the recording to others can watch later. Yes, after this is done, we'll get this up and online and sent out in Alina's follow-up email.
Yes, and if you guys want the PowerPoint slides, I can send those out as well if you want them.
So another question in the chat from Gail. Do you have a contractor directory online?
Yes, we do have a contractors list for those during survey and National Register nominations, and I can send that out to you.
And I believe that Preservation Utah actually does manage a contractor directory as well for more brick and mortar topics. Is that correct, Alina?
Yes. So they also have, if you go to Preservation Utah's website, and I think it's under their resources tab, they have tools for property owners, and they do have contractors directory, and they have, you know, for rehab, electricians, architects, they have all of that on there as well. All right, for some reason, I can't see the chat. So if someone wants to let me know of any other questions, then I can answer those.
That was the only,
Okay.
Oh, Kelsey Moss from Preservation Utah. We here at Preservation Utah are constantly updating that directory. So thank you, Kelsey. Come on, more questions. Here we go. Michaela Okte. What is the state budget for CLG grants? How was the $10,000 cap determined?
So the budget this year for CLG grants, last year we had to, no one got their full grant amount last year because we had so many people apply that, you know, we do have budget limits that we reached. So we did have to limit everyone, not by much. It was only like less than $1,000 and stuff. But this year, I think our budget is more flexible this year, or we do have a little bit more. So hopefully, depending on how many applications we get in, hopefully we will be able to fund everyone fully this year and stuff. And then the $10,000 cap it's kind of complicated, but we can only give $10,000 out for rehab projects, because anything over that we have to do a covenant. Or is it a covenant or is it an easement on the property? Is it something like that that's actually attached to the deed, where we don't want to get involved in that kind of arena, and neither do property owners. So it's capped at $10,000 for that. But for other projects, depending on the circumstances, we may be more flexible with that maximum.
Okay, so Heather Young asked, where can I find a list of current properties listed on the National Register in our area? So one of those could be reaching out directly to Corey Jensen. He would be more than happy to do that. I'm also going to throw a link in here of a web-based map that you can kind of explore your own community that we manage. And Corey, did you want to add something?
No, just, yeah, if you want to send me an email, I don't know, Alina, do you have our email address? I can just give that to you. It's CORYJENSEN at utah.gov. And we can get a printout of all the properties for your community or just the National Register ones. There's a survey for your community. We can give you a spreadsheet of all those properties.
And then